Hey, everybody, welcome back to Mindset with Randy and I. We are looking forward to talking with Nic Marks today. This is going to be a really fun episode because we're diving into the concept and the idea, and we're talking all about happiness. I want to give a quick background on Nic. He's been working in the field of happiness and well-being and the quality of life for over 25 years with a particular emphasis of measurement and how to create positive change. He's also the founder of Friday Pulse, FridayPulse.com, and his TED Talk, which is incredible, is been seen over 2.3 million times. The Future of Happiness. I think I may be getting it. What's the name of the TED Talk?
The Happy Planet Index.
Yes, and it's absolutely incredible. And I wanted to start off today talking a little bit about that TED Talk because one of the things that you talk about is how fear gets in the way of happiness, and how certain things may appear to be a nightmare, but really we got to find the happiness in that. And right now we're sitting here at September 2nd. We're all walking through COVID together. How do you catalog the fear right now when it comes to happiness?
So, that's a simple and a very complex question, but
I like simple and complex. Yeah.
All of our emotions, fear, anger, sadness, happiness, are deeply functional. They're highly functional for us. They've helped us survive and thrive through the millennia. And in a way, that survive and thrive is a clue in that the sort of so-called negative emotions like fear and anger, which are part of the fight and flight mechanism, are really helping us survive in the sense that they're dealing with threats in our immediate environment. Whereas happiness and other positive emotions are actually helping us thrive. They're basically about opportunities. So when we frame things as a threat, we're trying to avoid things. It's basically saying, stop, avoid this. Whereas when we are framing things in a positive way, it's what can we approach? And so obviously, fear is a very immediate signal because it could kill us straight away. So it becomes very, very imminent. But actually, the way that we build and we develop are much more around the positive emotions. So with COVID, with us being frightened of this very secret, small thing that none of us really understand, virus that's just mysterious, and it makes us suspicious of other people and stops us behaving in all sorts of ways that we were quite used to. Like trust must have absolutely fallen through the roof in society because we look at everybody thinking, oh my God, could they bring it to us or whatever? So it affects our behavior enormously, and we see that now, obviously, in our consumption patterns, in the way that we don't want to go into offices, all those sort of things, which are all perfectly functional responses, but they also have knock-on consequences. So it's very, very difficult. It's a very difficult situation because fear is so strong, and it's strong for very sensible reasons. But we may be doing too much to protect ourselves sometimes from it, or collectively, rather than individually, and it's a very difficult situation in which to balance.
So would you say that, Nic, is there a fundamental antidote to fear? Is there one common element or one common emotion that you've seen across the board in terms of your modeling?
That's a difficult question to ask because sometimes fear is exactly what you should feel. And also fear can motivate us. It changes our behavior. So, if you think of it in terms of business and team leaders or senior leaders, some try and manage by fear. It's not that they don't get results. They do get some results, but they basically erode people's sense of confidence and well-being as they do so. So in a short-term tactic, it can work a bit. But basically, you don't build teams. You don't build the bonds between them. So, probably trust is the opposite of fear in some ways, but it's sometimes even when we're in trusting situations, it's right to be frightened. So it's a very difficult question to answer because I don't want to say fear is invalid, but the way that we undo the stress of anxiety or fear is with positive emotions. And in some ways we know this in that if we're stressed, when the body is, basically in fight mode, it's basically saying, there's something going wrong. The best way to release it is to do something like put on music and dance or meditate or go for a walk, do something physical that makes us feel positive. And then the positive emotions undo that effect of it. So there's sort of undoing effects of the positive emotions, but we shouldn't live in a world that is eliminated of fear, but we should put it in perspective. And perspective taking is often the best way.
Yeah, because I've noticed, again, we speak of COVID, and that seems to be, that has no international borders. We know that you're in the UK, we're in the United States. From two questions, from the happiness index, would you say that there is a greater sense of happiness in the UK or in the United States based on, again, what you've been able to conclude? And then secondly, COVID seems to be self-defeating for a lot of people, because on the one hand, you're happy for that moment, and then news breaks or something happens, and then you sort of, have this sense of dejection again, and the positivity levels are reduced. So it's kind of like it ebbs and flows, and it becomes frustrating, quite honestly. So, I know I landed you two questions, but I know you're a pro and you can handle both.
Well, the straight statistical question between is the UK happier than the US is traditionally the UK is very slightly happier than the US, and if you want to know the reason why, and there are countries that are happier than UK, so don't take this personally. It's mainly to do with income inequality. In the sense that the bottom quarter of the income spectrum in the US is less happy than the bottom quarter in the UK. And actually, if you look at Scandinavia, you look at Switzerland, you look at other countries which are even less income inequality, they are happier too. And basically, it's not that the average person is happier; it's that the people who have got the least are happier in those countries because they've got better social safety nets and they are less poor relative to other people. So they have less problems. So in a way, it's that part bringing down the average, which is the main difference between countries. And in developing countries, of course, poor countries, sub-Saharan Africa, of course, they're much less happy. They might have joy, but they also have a lot more anger. They have a lot more, health problems. They have a lot more other things too. So that's the general international one. And I haven't seen fantastically good data comparing pre and post COVID across the whole population. We've got some anxiety statistics that have come out in the UK. Anxiety doubled straight away as soon as COVID hit. And the question that's based on is, what did you feel anxious yesterday? It's a straight yes/no question. It used to be like 20 to 24% of the UK population would say yes, and it went up to 45-50% felt anxious. I'm amazed it wasn't 100%, but but it went up massively, and then it slowly come down, but it's still higher than it was. So we've got more anxiety, but what you have is a very uneven experience between people with COVID. You've got some people who actually, quite like me, are locked down quite happily. I live in the country. I live with a woman that I not only am married to, but I like. So it's quite easy for me to hang out with Zoe. And, our kids have come and gone. They were here for a long period. Actually, they were here too long at one stage. I wanted to get rid of them. But, they're teens and 20s. And we didn't have preschool kids, which I think was very stressful for people if they had preschool kids or kids back from school, or elder people living in their household. It became more so. So we were pretty good. Some people, it's been the worst time ever. I mean, if you talk to domestic abuse charities or refuges, they've had an absolute influx of people as lockdown ended with some terrible situations. Yes, husbands and wives, but children being violent towards parents, or there's all sorts of stuff going on because everyone has just got so claustrophobic. So I think there's a huge variety. Some people it's suited, particularly more introverted. It's suited. Extroverts, it probably has less. The young, it definitely has less. So there's such a variety. It will take years for people to analyze the data and work out what's gone.
I want to dive into, Nic, a little bit about something you said earlier about fight or flight, and anxiety, because I think a lot of times we can't control that fight or flight millisecond where we react, and you give some really good points on how to kind of balance ourselves a little bit in your TED Talk. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about that, because I think everybody's always looking for, and I know I am, always looking for something to kind of help them in those fight or flight moments to just get back to center.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, but I mean, you were talking, Randy, about the news and basically being exposed to that. It's definitely data which shows being exposed to less news makes people happier. So turning off social media, not obsessively watching the news, is better for our happiness. Doesn't necessarily mean better for everything else in our life, because sometimes we need to consume news, but that is definitely true. But if we think about how we can introduce, I'm always very interested. Yes, I like numbers. I even like decimal places. I'm that weird, But I'd like to help people. I was saying to you before, I actually trained as a therapist as well as working as a statistician. So I have a sort of thing where I'm trying to support people to live better lives. And I've always thought about my data as doing the same stuff as, can we give people clues about what they can do in their lives? And so in the TED Talk, I talk about what we call the 5 ways to well-being, which is a positive mental health actions that people can take. And it was released in the UK in 2008, and it's still very widely used. But and they are 5 simple things we can do in our daily lives. So they are connect, which is that our relationships are the foundation, the cornerstone of our happiness. And so, how do you reach out to people? How do you see people? The second one is to be active. Lots of evidence that physical activity is good for our mood, good for our longer term well-being. But I'm not talking gym bunny levels. I'm not talking ultra marathons or even marathons. I'm more talking about sort of 10,000 steps idea, that basically we walk a bit every day. Or if you're in a bad mood, just put music on and dance. If you're, if that's your thing, move is very, very good. It releases all sorts of tension in the bodies. The third one is take notice. I think if we were messaging it now, we might have gone for be mindful. But the idea of taking notice is being engaged in your world. So engaged in the outer world and the inner world. So noticing beauty, aesthetics, noticing what's going on inside with you, because we sort of have lots of clues that maybe we push away or we don't listen to. So it's really about bringing into awareness both the inside and the outside world. The fourth is to keep learning, which is, it's great. Novelty is great for us. Learning, trying to do things that challenge us, stretch us is great. And the fifth one is to give. Which actually giving to others is really good for us. It's sort of a beautiful way that, in a way, evolution has worked, that actually want to look after the group, and we feel good for that. And I think that gratitude, thanking people, appreciating them, as well as financially giving or giving of time and resources is great. And so those are the 5 things that people can do in their own lives: connect, be active, take notice, keep learning, and give.
Yeah.
That's wonderfully said. I find, in terms of giving, it's always easy to write a check, but it's not as easy to give of your time. Whereas the latter is much more impactful, because as much as you might be serving, you in fact are the one being served.
Yeah.
And that's what people sense, you get a real sense of joy and accomplishment and, pride in fellow humanity when you're able to do that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, with all of these things, it's about balance. It's about, if you connect too much, you start not being able to do the others. If you give too much, then you haven't got enough for yourself. All of these things are about finding the right balance.
Yeah.
I would say generosity is always in your control. Generosity of your time is always, you may not have much money, you may not have, but you've always got something to give. And so it's something you can do whatever your circumstance.
Yeah. You talk about gratitude, last week I interviewed I had a mental health awareness week, where I interviewed a lot of people on mental awareness. And the reason was I watched a documentary about called The Weight of Gold by Michael Phelps, talking about the anxiety of Olympians, and Michael Phelps specifically, and many others who contemplated suicide and had so much anxiety when you thought, just the world was perfect for them. And so I interviewed all these people last week, and the common theme from the therapists, the people in rehab, the rehab owner, it came down to gratitude. And so, when you're talking about people in other countries who are poorer and happier, to me, and everything else that we're talking about today, and all that's to do with, how do you just get present and be grateful for what we have, right? We're all having little freedoms taken away from us right now. But what is the secret of gratitude? What is the secret of, Eckhart Tolle and what you're talking about, be present, right? But what's the formula? And I know it's different for everybody, but that, I think, is at the root of happiness and unhappiness, just being grateful.
Yeah, it is. And it's, I think that we're lucky to be born in these times in lots of ways. COVID might not be the best thing ever, but you think about all the other times in history we could have been born in. and and suffered much worse fates than we were now. And the country, even being born now, we're born in rich Western countries rather than in poor Southern countries or whatever it is. So there's an awful lot to be grateful for. And of course, we can lose it in the moment because the negative signals are strong to us, because we're also interested in our own, selfishly in our own existence. But taking that time, I mean, I'm a great believer in reflection and creating moments of reflection. Whether that's something that you do every evening, you know, as you go to before you go to bed, or whenever it is, you take time to reflect.
Yeah.
On what's gone well, and you know, even with the work I do with Friday Pulse, we build that into our team building tools in the sense that we encourage teams to reflect each week about what's gone well for them, to reflect each week on who they want to thank in their team and appreciate, and to write them a note and things like that. Because these things it's very, very easy to skip over these things in life. You know, life is very fast paced now. There's always something on, there's always something competing for our attention. And just taking time out and thinking in your own words, in your own way, what's gone well for you is very, very healing.
Yeah.
And it's actually really hard to break through people's crowded lives to find that space. But that's what we need to do. I think that's something we need to do. We do need to slightly fight against the pace of life sometimes and carve out these spaces for us.
I love that. Just the routine and taking the pause to reflect. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Walking is that a lot for me. I try and go walking most days. I'm not a runner. I'm not a creature of speed. I'm a slow moving animal, but I like to walk. And, you know, I do like to walk with Zoe, my wife, but I actually really like to walk alone sometimes. And we'll, you know, she'll often say, oh, you need to go on your own now. You don't really want me with you. And it's not that she doesn't want to be with me. So she knows it's good for my reflection to just, and there's something about when I walk and my feet pad one in front of the others, I just get into a slight rhythm. It's like a walking meditation for me. And I'm not very good at sitting and meditating. That's not my thing. I've got nothing against it. For some people, that's absolutely the right thing to do. I tend to do that walking is where I do.
Yeah.
You know, I find, you know, somebody had told me not that long ago that, you know, if you want to be happy, don't watch the news. I'll never forget that quote. And, you know, I want to speak about problems versus solutions. You know, all too often, you know, irrespective of, you know, whatever side of the aisle somebody's on and so forth, you hear all these issues and problems that are constantly put in front of us with very little thought and consideration for solutions, or at least follow through on solutions. Where is a happy medium? I mean, how can we get to a result without, you know, incessantly pushing problems and problems and problems on people that effectively impact their mindset and happiness to move toward the finish line of positivity and the finish line of happiness and to a more complete life? Because I think that is a real stumbling block in today's world, is, you know, this constant deluge of problems with very little thought for solution.
Yeah, it's a complicated thing. I used to work with a really brilliant Chilean. He was called Manfred Max Neef, and he used to talk about one of the things you need to do is identify which issues are of secondary importance and which issues are of primary importance, and to really dedicate your life to the primary importance ones and not worry too much about the secondary importance. And, you know, someone wrote a book called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff or whatever it was. And in many ways, it's the same thing. It's like, what are the big important things for you? And they don't have to be the same for all of us, but it's identifying for you what you think those things are and trying to think more deeply to the causes of them rather than the symptoms, and how can you get towards them. And I think that's that's partly the maturation process that happens for us all naturally. As we get older, we start thinking more deeply and about things, or a significant percentage of us do. So, you know, it is that, but that's my way of dealing with it. And I'm quite a thinker, so I do spend a lot of time reflecting on things, and that's how I identify where to put my energy. Because I mean, I've worked partly in climate change, which is one of the most depressing things to work in. And after about 10 years, I thought I'll have a break of it because, you know, but, you know, you have to keep motivating yourself because the problem doesn't go away just because you run out of energy for it. So you have to keep on thinking about how you're going to do it. So I've taken my happiness very seriously over the years. I've made sure that I have enough things I do that are fun and joyful, as well as doing the things that I do as seriously. And it's creating that balance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to talk about that because I think the people listening now, in the future, whenever they listen to this podcast and this interview, I love that resonates with me when you say, I take my happiness very seriously, because I think sometimes I don't know if I've ever heard anybody say that sentence, and to me, when I hear it, I don't know if I've ever personally said in something where hey, I'm taking my happiness very seriously. I've never articulated that way. I may have felt it, but I have never articulated it that way. And so when it comes down to what you're talking about, kind of rhythm, routine, I'm going to throw in the word kind of systems. If somebody's wanting to take hold and say, okay, my happiness now, especially during COVID, where I'm putting my priorities, I'm connecting to my personal priorities and values at a different level. What are the one or two things they need to do daily to take their own happiness seriously?
I mean, it will be different things for different people, but they have those flavors of the connect, be active, take notice, keep learning, and give, and there'd be different balances at different times of life, and we'll have different passions that we want to follow. But I'm relatively recently remarried, so I've had a marriage go wrong, and in a way that was taking my happiness seriously, that I exited that relationship because although marriage was really meaningful to me, it was important to me, there were all sorts of things, I actually was really unhappy. and so if I was to take my work seriously and me seriously, I needed to do something about that, and we still have a good enough relationship, and the kids are all good. I mean, they're all grown up anyway, but I take my new relationship very seriously. I mean, I say new, it's 5 years, but it's and I think that it's important that I still work at that. As I don't mean in work, actually, because I just mean it's about time. And in fact, someone once said to me that the currency of relationships is time.
Mm-hmm. Say that again.
The currency of relationships is time.
Yeah.
And it's the same with our kids. People go, I do quality time with my kids. That is not the kids' agenda. It's quantity time to the kids. It's, you've got to be with them with the bad times and the good times. You can't just come in and rush and spend half an hour in the evening and read them a story and go, you have a great relationship. It's partly is just the hours. And it's so I think that, we've all got the same number of hours in a day. We've all got the same number of hours in a week. It's how do I allocate my time? And when I'm there, how present am I? Because of course, you can allocate hours and not be present. So it's about your presence and your time, and that's the biggest gift you can give to somebody. Actually, is listen to them well, engage with them well, and give them your time. We know we have friends that struggle. They want our time, don't they? They don't want you to send them a candle or a bottle of wine. They would like to sit down and talk with you, or just walk with you side by side, saying nothing. Sometimes, it's that presence is really, really important, and I think that's where that's the thing that we totally have control over, our use of time.
Yeah.
There's always studies that I've seen shifting a little bit to the employer-employee relationship, and there are so many studies on employee morale, employee happiness, boosting productivity, but I rarely see studies on the effect of the employer. Now, in massive organizations, it's obviously easy. There's shareholders, there's board of directors, but what about the small to medium-sized company? What's the effect on the employer who's taking so much risk and so much, investment of time, of, currency of happiness and priority of family and so forth, employer standpoint, and the impact of happiness on them?
I think I understand your question. So basically, happiness is an experience, or it's basically, I think of happiness as the measure of the employee experience, in the sense that employees experience things. How do you measure that? The way that I do it is I ask them every week, how have you felt at work this week? Were you unhappy? Were you very happy? And a scale, and you create a metric out of that. And that's a very responsive metric for businesses, which basically shows which teams are happy, which ones aren't, how they're going up and down. And what I know from our data is that when teams are happier, they are more collaborative, they're more creative, they're more innovative. They do more sales if they're a sales team. Their customer services scores are better if they're a customer service team, whatever it is. So when teams are happy, it's a great thing for the business. It's a great thing for in keeping staff, for keeping talent. It's a great thing for attracting talent. There's even people that go through and show that it affects share prices. That if you look at cultures that have got better score, a business culture got better scores either on the Great Place to Work list, or Glassdoor is actually even easier to use because it's a public data set and very easy to use, and you get exact scores. And it shows that they have higher share growth over a 10-year period. So it's all exceptionally aligned. But why don't most companies take it seriously? I mean, it's like it's an interesting thing to think when all the data's there. Actually, why don't they? And I presume it's fear. I presume that it's actually not really understanding how to do it, that it feels frightening to ask people how they feel because you're worried about a Pandora's box of negativity and things. Because in some ways, the employer-employee relationship is still grounded in a sort of 19th century sort of mode of operandum in lots of ways, and I think actually one thing that COVID is really interesting for is that employers are learning to treat their employees as adults. They can work at home. They don't have to clock in, clock out. Actually, their productivity might go up. This is it's sort of known, but it's like a total experiment that's gone on, You've got 60% of UK workers working at home for 4 months, and the economy might have fallen aside, but that was a demand side, not a supply problem. Mm-hmm. The supply side was all there. It's the demand side that's absolutely collapsed, which is the fear. So this is very interesting to see how we do it. But I think that employers have to learn to treat their employees as adults and have that adult to adult relationship rather than the parent-child one, if you want to get deeply psychological about it. But that's kind of what you have to move towards. And I think that's very exciting that we might be able to do that.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Tell us about Friday Pulse. I know your company is Friday Pulse. We've been talking a lot about happiness. Yeah, I want to give you a little bit of time to talk about your company.
It's the same thing. I'm a statistician that measures happiness. So what do? I basically, for a long time, I spent 10 years criticizing governments for how they measure progress, how they measure quality of life. And basically, I've now gone and said, right, I don't think businesses are very good at measuring the employee experience. They're basically, and if we think about something like employee engagement, the surveys are too long. They're not very responsive. No one really knows what engagement means anyway. If I ask you how engaged you at work, you can't give me an answer. But if I say to you how happy you are, you understand how to answer that question. So I can measure it. And so we create a measure of team happiness. We update it every week. So we're called Friday Pulse because on a Friday, we ask people, how was your week? And I think the week is the right way of measuring it. If you ask any longer, then you don't get very responsive data. If you ask more often every day, people get bored of giving you an answer. So we do every week. It's people work in week sprints. How was your week? Great. There you go. Go home for the weekend. And so then we create metrics we call it a happiness KPI for the senior leaders, that they can see how every team is doing. You do things like patterns emerge out of the data, like you have setbacks and people bounce back. And actually, we saw that across all of our clients with COVID. The week of March the 18th, all across North America and Europe, boom, everyone crashed. Everyone was unhappy. And then there's been a slow recovery. So we do that. We also do like mini culture profiles for people, which is 15 questions once a quarter. But basically a data company that helps support team leaders and senior leaders to create happy, productive teams, happy, productive work cultures. And the numbers help them do that. We're more like a sort of zero in the sense we're more like an accounting package. We're not going to come in and tell people precisely what they do because every circumstance is different. We will do the very best we can, like the idea of the 5 ways, about how we can nudge you towards creating better teams. But at the end of the day, we're a software platform for people to subscribe to and your employees to engage with. We do support people a little bit the call once a quarter, but we're not a consultancy. We're not a training company. We are a platform to do that, and that's what we do. And it's with COVID, we actually at the beginning of it, we realized that no one really wanted to sign up and pay for something, so we made 3 months for free for any small to medium sized organization. That's up to 1,000 people organization, and we've had a lot of uptake with that. And now people are conversing at the end of that pipeline because they get used to the data, they like it, they find it super helpful. So that's what we do. So it's actually even free to use to begin with.
Smart business move. Well, I'm a business coach that goes in and creates change. So maybe I can refer you a client so you can tell them what their happiness index is, and you can refer them back to me to actually incorporate some daily change. And then we can send them over to Randy to make sure they all have an estate plan, so they're all kind of safe, right? I mean,
as long as they're from Michigan and Florida, I can help them with any of their legal needs.
Right. Well, this has been a great talk on happiness and how to measure it. And Nic, I appreciate Randy and I'll speak for both of us, appreciate you calling in all the way from the UK. It's great that with everything going on in the world that we can connect from all over the world and share, things with people that just make their life and their just everything about their business better. So I appreciate everything that you said, everything that you shared. My last question to you is, what's your favorite book and why?
Probably Cloud Atlas as a novel. Do you know that as a novel? It's an epic novel over many centuries, but basically it's a battle between brutality and sort of wise intellectual governments, and about how they battle over human history. And I just love the layers to it of that. I've read it 2 or 3 times. I probably should reread it. I probably haven't read it for 5 years again, because I always see something in it. So I think that's my favorite novel.
Yeah. All right. I'm rereading The 4 Agreements right now, which I've read about 7 or 8 times. It's a great book. Randy, closing thoughts?
It's said that statistics is the grammar of science, and you've given us quite a lesson, because all too often we take things for granted. I think whether you're an employee, an employer, or a sort of spectator of whatever somebody else might be trying to progress toward. So I think if all of us look at our lives and say, you know what, I'm happy living the life I live, then our happiness factors go up. But it's getting people to that first so that we can have positive momentum forward. But I think, in a small way, this 30-minute segment hopefully gives those of our audience members some viewpoint and perspective, so they can, again, take a look at themselves and say, you know what, I am happier than I thought. So thank you for sharing your ideas, Nic.
Yeah, it all starts with awareness, and you definitely infused a lot of things for people to think about, including myself, to raise our own happiness index.
Yeah, I'm a lot happier. So
I am too. I feel great. Nic, any closing thoughts?
No, thank you for inviting me. And if listeners, I'm very active on LinkedIn. That's where I do most of my stuff. I'm not a fan of Twitter. I do have a Twitter handle, but I'm not a fan of it. Right?
How can people get a hold of you, Nic? Tell everybody, we got FridayPulse.com. How else can people get a hold of you?
So my own website is nicmarks.org, and LinkedIn, Nic, Nic Marks, and just send me an invite, and I'll accept. And I post once a week, once a fortnight there. Okay.
All right, good. Nic, thank you. This was a blast. Randy, thank you. And appreciate you both, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right. Thanks, guys.